Hello and welcome to the Sana Psychological Podcast, your safe space for connection, healing, and growth. Each episode, our experienced clinicians and special guests will share strategies, stories, and resources to support your unique path to well-being. Because at Sana, your mental health matters. Hi, everyone. I'm Paige Abbott. Welcome back to the Sana Psychological Podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about an interesting topic, which is spring anxiety and reverse SAD. I don't know about you, but this is a topic that I am newly familiar with. So the idea of reverse SAD, even as a therapist and a long-term psychologist, is actually quite new for me. So today we are talking about this phenomenon, which does not get nearly enough attention, which is that strange feeling that some people experience as winter is ending. You know the narrative we hear every year. Spring arrives, the sun comes out, flowers bloom, and suddenly everyone is supposed to feel energized, hopeful, and happy. But what if you don't? What if the longer days are leaving you feeling restless, overwhelmed, anxious, or maybe even a little bit low? If this sounds familiar, you might be experiencing what's often called spring anxiety or reverse seasonal affective disorder, which we will shorten today to be reverse SAD. Today, we're going to unpack what reverse SAD actually is, where it comes from, how to recognize it in yourself, and some gentle strategies for navigating it. So if spring is ever making you feel a little bit off instead of uplifted, then this episode is for you. So let's jump right into what is reverse seasonal affective disorder. Most people have heard of seasonal affective disorder or SAD, and that's the type of depression that tends to show up in fall or winter as the days are getting shorter and sunlight is decreasing. But there's a lesser known counterpart, reverse SAD, which is sometimes also called summer pattern seasonal depression. Instead of being triggered by darkness and cold, reverse SAD is actually linked to the shift towards longer days, warmer weather, and that increased stimulation that happens in spring and early summer. Symptoms can include increased anxiety, irritability, agitation, restlessness, trouble sleeping, racing thoughts, feeling overwhelmed, decreased appetite, and decreased difficulty with concentration. For some people, spring doesn't feel like a fresh start. It feels more like this sensory overload. Let's talk about why this happens. So in my learning so far, it seems that there isn't just one reason why reverse SAD actually happens. It seems to be from a combination of biological, psychological, and environmental factors. Some of those include the first really obvious one, including that sudden change in light exposure. So our bodies run on something called the circadian rhythm, which is basically our internal clock which regulates sleep, hormones, and energy levels. When spring arrives and daylight increases really quickly, that internal clock has to recalibrate. And for some people, that adjustment can temporarily disrupt sleep and mood regulation. Another factor that can contribute is sleep disruption. So the earlier sunrises, later sunsets can shorten sleep or make it harder to fall asleep, especially if your body is sensitive to light changes. So when the sleep quality drops, anxiety and irritability often rise. Another factor that can be part of this is increased stimulation. So spring often means busier schedules, more activity happening, more social expectations, as well with warmer temperatures. So just overall, there's a lot more pressure on us to perform and experience life with maybe less of those counterpoints of rest that we give ourselves permission to take in the colder months of the year. For people who are sensitive to environmental stimulation or who thrive in that slower pace of winter, this can feel really overwhelming. And finally, there is that added pressure, not just to do and perform, but the emotional pressure to feel happy. When everyone around you seems really excited about spring and are talking about how great it is and how much they're loving the nice weather and how much they're looking forward to summer, feeling anxious or having some of those low level feelings of sadness or even little d depression symptoms can create this strange sense of isolation. You might start to think things like, why do I feel worse when everyone feels better? Which might even lead to that secondary thought of, what's wrong with me? How come I'm like this? That disconnect can make your experience heavier and just exaggerate those symptoms, that experience, and that feeling of isolation. So, what are some signs that you might be experiencing this reverse sad phenomenon, or it might show up as spring anxiety? Well, it certainly doesn't seem to look the same for everyone, but there are a few common patterns. So, you might notice that you're more restless than usual, kind of like your nervous system is buzzing, your sleep becomes irregular, either difficulty falling asleep or waking earlier than expected. You feel irritable or emotionally sensitive for no reason. You experience anticipatory anxiety, where your brain starts scanning for things that could go wrong. You might feel a vague sense of pressure to do more as the weather improves. And another big clue is timing. So, if these feelings tend to show up in a cyclical way around the same time every year, especially in early spring, that pattern could be an important signal that you may want to pay attention to. Your body might be responding to those seasonal shifts. And rather than putting that pressure on yourself or expectation that what's changed? What am I doing wrong? What do I need to do instead? Starting to build awareness of these cyclical patterns isn't enough to necessarily stop them, but awareness is a huge step that can make a big difference for people. Being aware of where something's coming from and when it's going to be coming up gives us that opportunity to plan, prepare, and also adjust our perspective and our internal narrative so that maybe, just maybe, it impacts us a little bit differently and maybe a little bit less. So, what are some other ways to navigate spring anxiety? If spring tends to activate your nervous system, definitely the goal is not to to force yourself. Sorry, you do want to support yourself. You don't want to force yourself to be something or someone different than you're not. You do want to support yourself, your body, your mind, your nervous system, and your relationships through the transition. So, here are a few strategies that you may want to try to see if they can help. One is to stabilize your sleep routine. Try to go to bed and wake up at similar times. Dim the lights in the evening to start to get yourself prepared for that transition into sleep. Reduce later in the evening screen exposure, and try using things like blackout curtains or a sleep mask to try and reduce that sensory input if you're noticing that sunrise or even the light at night keeps you awake or wakes you up too early. These may be ways that you can help stabilize your sleep, which then can help regulate mood and anxiety. Another strategy to try is gradual transitions. So sometimes that sudden switch from winter slowness into spring quickness can be really jarring. So instead of jumping into a packed schedule, trying to ease into that. So starting with small shifts like shorter walks outside, maybe gradually building in more social activity, one social plan per week or weekend instead of several, or filling up all of your days, and just slowly starting to increase your activity levels so that, again, we're supporting this gradual shift so that your brain and your body aren't all of a sudden feeling jolted, going, wow, why did we go from none to all? That's a big change in pacing, and our brains and bodies tend to respond better to the gradual and the subtle than the sudden. Another technique to try is grounding your nervous system. So, spring anxiety can just literally feel like too much energy in the system, which is the basis of anxiety in general. So, practices that can help regulate that energy can be really powerful. And those can include things like slow breathing exercises, a calming, grounding meditation or relaxation. We've had one of those previously on the podcast that you might want to check out. Gentle stretching, yoga, tai chi, those sorts of gentle, non-vigorous, non-strenuous movement. So we're not moving to exercise in those moments. We're moving to move our energy through in these gradual, gentle ways. Spending quiet time with yourself or out in nature can be really helpful and grounding as well. And sometimes journaling or talking things through to talk some of those thoughts or write some of those thoughts out in the head can provide us a different perspective on them. So the goal is not to try and eliminate that anxiety instantly, but instead to create those moments of calm regulation. As we talked about before, awareness building can be really helpful because that can allow us to normalize our experience. So, one of the most helpful things to remember is that you are not the only person who struggles with seasonal transition. You are not alone, and it is okay wherever you are at. And it's important that you accept wherever you are at and learn to work with it in a gentle way rather than trying to force yourself to be somewhere or something other than you are. Lastly, I do want to make the pitch that if your seasonal anxiety is becoming really intense, so it's interfering with your ability to function in work, relationships, just day-to-day life, then that may be a sign that it might be helpful to talk with some sort of healthcare professional. You may start with a physician, you may start with a mental health professional, whoever is around in your world that you have some trust and some sense of safety with, maybe an important place to start. If they're not familiar with this phenomenon or aren't the best person to help you, hopefully they can provide you with alternative recommendations to get you going so that you feel you have that direction moving forward. Because remember, you don't have to navigate this alone. So, as we wrap up today's episode, here's something to remember. Every season affects people differently. For some, spring feels really energizing. For others, it can feel dysregulating, overwhelming, and emotionally complicated. Neither response is wrong. Seasonal transitions are powerful biological shifts, and learning how your mind and body respond to them is a form of self-awareness. It's certainly not a weakness. So if spring has ever felt heavier than expected, consider this a gentle reminder to move through the season at your own pace. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today, talking about spring anxiety and seasonal SAD. If this episode resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone who might feel a little out of sync when the seasons change. And please don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast. We really appreciate your support and love building community and connection. All the best and take care for now. Thank you for listening to the Sana Psychological Podcast. We're glad you joined us today. For more resources, free tools, or to book a session with our team, visit sanapsychological.com. Your mental health is our priority. Until next time, be gentle with yourself and take good care.